Well, Bible readers, it is week 31. I don't know if you're counting or not, but we've been at this 210 days at the end of week 30. So congratulations on hanging with it. I know we've all feel like we haven't kept up as well as we would like to, but I guarantee that you've almost certainly read a lot more Bible than you would have otherwise. And that's the whole point, right? And we're getting the big picture, which is also the point. One story that leads to Jesus out of all of these books, the vast collection. So we're going to be finishing Daniel this week. And the book of Daniel can be very spooky. And there are a lot of people, unfortunately, who abuse it, who try to find insights into what's happening in the present. You know, where in Daniel does it tell me what the stock market is going to do next week, or whether Saudi Arabia is going to attack the United Arab Emirates or whatever? Remember that the book of Daniel is written for us. It's for all of God's people, but it's not written to us. It was written to the people of the exile and the post-exilic period, who are really suffering and wondering about God's faithfulness. So remember, in Daniel, you've got stories that we are probably have heard before about Daniel in the lion's den and the fiery furnace, and those stories about God's delivering his people from the oppression of the pagan empire. But then there are visions, and the visions freak us out, but they're really about the same thing: how to live hopefully and faithfully when the bad people, the pagans, the people who don't acknowledge God, are in control. So consistently, we see how God delivers his people, not always in the way that they would want, but consistently he does, and he gives blasphemous rulers their comeuppance, an expression of judgment, as he is promising his full rule, that he will be king. So in these visions, think about the big picture, okay? The details often have to do with events in Daniel's time and in a few generations that follow. They aren't about contemporary events that we're reading about, but we can see how relevant they are. In chapter 7, for example, Daniel has a vision of a series of kingdoms, and he's really being told, you're going to have to wait a long while. There isn't just this empire, there's another and another. But something's coming that's going to change all of that. God is sending someone who will change all of that. We see the prophecy of the 70 weeks, and we think, well, what's up 70 weeks? Well, Jeremiah had said, the exile is going to last for 70 years. But now Daniel is saying not 70, but 70 times 7. The word for week is also the word for 7. So 77s, meaning they're going to be 490 years. In other words, we're going to have to wait a long time with all of that. As you get into the end of the book, there's a depiction of someone who stops sacrifice in the temple. This is almost certainly an image of a figure who arises about 165 years before the birth of Jesus, a guy by the name of Antiochus IV Epiphanes, a ruler of the Greek Seleucid Empire. And we'll probably have more to say about him just as background to the New Testament as time goes on. But he tried to eliminate the worship of God in his territories, which included Jerusalem. In all of this, God is going to prevail. Again, chapter 7, so important, that vision there, because who is it who changes what those evil empires are doing, the four beasts that Daniel sees? It's one like a son of man. And later we're going to ask ourselves, why does Jesus call himself Son of Man? He's identifying himself with this figure. In chapter 12, Daniel says God is going to raise the dead. And we think, well, how can God be faithful to all of his people? And how can Israel come back, so to speak, from the situation they've been in? And the answer is resurrection. And again, we're going to see how this is pointing us to Jesus and what Jesus does. So as you're reading Daniel, and as you're reading these other late books of the Old Testament, remember the end is not so much the end of the world, but the goal of God's plan. This is how God is bringing everything to the point where he will rule fully and completely. All right, we're going to read Haggai. Haggai is a short book. You'll finish it in a day, just 2 chapters. Haggai is one of the early exiles. He's encouraging Israel to live faithfully and hopefully in that period, which means building the temple. And by the way, if you're disappointed with the building of the temple, don't worry, he says, because God says, a second time I will shake the nations, and the glory of this house will be greater than the one before. Here he's referring to the way that the early Israelites built the tabernacle out of the wealth that the Egyptians had given them. And now he says God will shake the nations a second time. A lot of stuff there that's pointing us to Jesus. Zechariah, another very trippy prophet, kind of a combination of Daniel and maybe a little bit of Ezekiel, and you think maybe he's, been eating some mushrooms or something, and I don't mean to suggest that he is, but or encourage that kind of thing, but just there's some freaky stuff here. But what is he pointing out? His visions are saying God will overcome the shame and degradation of the exile. God is faithful in forgiving and protecting and purifying his people. He wants his people to be what he's always created them to be. And the promised shepherd is coming, just like Ezekiel said, but beware, the shepherd will be struck and the sheep will scatter. The true shepherd of Israel is going to take on himself the kind of suffering that you Israelites are experiencing now. Remember to check out the videos, and remember, if you feel like you're not making any progress, in 2.5 weeks, we start the New Testament. Keep reading, everybody.